Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another quick edit here on Freewheel Photos. Today we are working with a photo of a squirrel that my wife has deemed the name Chuck. So we're going to go ahead and edit Chuck. First step that I'm going to do is click Brilliance AI. And the goal here is really just to let ON1 kind of give me suggestions on what it thinks should happen with the basic tones of the image. So what I want it to do is kind of get rid of this color noise that's happening in the background, as well as brighten and add a little bit more contrast to the overall image. So here we are with what Brilliance AI has done. This is without Brilliance AI, and this is with it. So you can see it did activate the no noise AI, but I think that the color needs a little bit of work. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull down on the color amount, and I'm going to manage the color manually. It was just a little too magenta for my personal taste. Now, the next thing that I could do is let's play around with the camera profiles. These usually give a different feel to the overall image, but none of these are really speaking to me today. Yeah, not even linear raw. So I think ON1 standard is the most appropriate for this particular image, at least at this point in the edit. So I'm going to go ahead and push the contrast because I think it's just lacking some contrast. And then I'm going to kind of reshape the overall tonality of the image by going through the midtones and the shadows. So I want this to have like a deeper feel to the dynamics. And let's actually turn on our levels. You can see I have some space over here on the left side. So what that's telling me is I need to move my black point. And I'm going to turn on the clipping mask here. And we're just going to go ahead and pull the black point down until it starts to touch near the edges of the histogram. And if you don't know how to read a histogram, that's okay. All you really got to know is you usually, at least in an image like this, you'll usually want to have the histogram touching both sides over here. And where it was originally, if I just pull this back, you'll see that there's just no true black point in the image. And that could be stylistically pleasing, but for me, what I want to do is just pull this all the way down, not all, down far enough. And the areas where I'm losing details are on his paws or claws, whatever they're called for a squirrel, and then in the blacks of the eye. And I'm not overly concerned about that. There's also some details being lost down here in the grass. But again, those aren't points of the image that I'm concerned with. And I'm also not printing this, so I'm okay with clipping those. Let's go ahead and turn this off. And you can see just the before and after how much contrast we really brought back into this image. So the next thing that I'm going to do is pull down on my shadows just a touch here. And I'm also going to pull down, we'll move around the midtones and let's see, maybe open shadows and pull the midtones. Yeah, this is giving me the look that I was really trying to go for with this image. So we'll pull the shadows up just a bit and pull the midtones down just a touch. All right. The next step is going to be adding some more structure. Now, ON1 through Brilliance AI did add a good amount of structure, but I'm just going to push this a little bit further, maybe to about there. So before and after Brilliance AI. Now, I did say that I was going to modify the colors myself. The way that I like to start modifying the colors is in the develop module. I like to pull the vibrance up until I feel the colors get a level of richness. This is subjective. There's no right or wrong answer, by the way. And then what I like to do with saturation is just push this until it gets like cartoony looking, like this is cartoony looking to me, even though I think that that's pleasing, right? Again, this is subjective. I'm just going to pull this back until the colors are a little less cartoony looking overall. And what that does is when I get into the effects module, if I want to modify the colors further, I have more flexibility because I've essentially raised the volume on the colors going into my effects module. So that's the reason why I adjust it just a little bit here, because I'm setting the stage for deeper color work if I choose to do that. All right, so now we'll jump into local adjustments. And this is where I like to relight my image, right? The develop module is where I like to set my image settings, or at least the baseline of what I think the image is, priming the canvas, so to speak, if you're into painting. And then what I like to do is come over to local and really work on certain aspects. Now, before I go into that, I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter C on my keyboard, and I want to recrop this. I'm going to go ahead and pull this crop in, and I think I want to put his eye on this upper third. So I'm going to pull this down, and then I'm also going to pull it over. And what I'm looking at is balancing him with his tail. Now he's looking into this direction, so I want to give him space to look into this direction. But I also want to make sure that the tail has a little bit of space to be framed as well. So, this is, again, another subjective aspect of the edit. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but that is something that I felt needed to happen. And then I'll just pull in a little bit tighter, because it doesn't need to be like, you get the idea. He's a squirrel outside, standing up, looking off into this direction. What he's looking at, we don't know. It's out of frame. But we do know that he's looking into this direction. And that's what I want to kind of hone in on for the feel of this particular image. I'm going to go ahead and hit the enter key or return. And that gets us this framing, which I think is nice. He might be a little too far over to the left now that I'm looking at it. So I'm just going to reframe him over more towards the center. And again, this is all subjective. What I'm doing here, you may not even do to your image. So we'll do something like that. And now he feels a little bit more in the middle of the frame, and also giving some space for his tail, and everything else looks really nice around him, not distracting. So what are we going to do to relight? Well, let's go ahead and add an adjustment. And then I'm going to start with a depth mask. So we'll go ahead and right click on the mask icon and then click create depth mask. Now, if you're not familiar with depth masks, these are new masks inside of ON1 Photo Raw 2025. And essentially what it does is it looks at what's closest to the camera or closest to the lens, and then what's furthest from the camera or furthest from the lens. And then it creates a mask, essentially revealing things based off of that. Probably did a terrible job explaining it, but looking at this on the screen will be a little bit better. So this is the overlay of what the mask looks like when you turn on a depth mask. Now, obviously, the squirrel and the grass, it was closer, so it's applying this effect to those areas, and it's doing it in a way that is gradual, and that's the beauty of working with a depth mask. Now, we can modify this, but right now it's actually doing the opposite of what I want it to do. I kind of want to take control of the background and leave my foreground relatively untouched, or untouched based off of how I want to relight this image. So what I'm going to do is right click on the mask and hit invert. And so now it is selecting the background of the image, and it is masking this away from my subject, which is more of what I want to do. Now, I have a video explaining how to kind of work with this mask. So in this particular video, what I'm going to do is just kind of work through editing this image using this tool. And if you want to learn more about depth mask, check the description box below. You'll find that video, a link to that video. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull down on my levels here and kind of make this really like tight on the squirrel and all the areas that I don't want this mask to go. So this is where I like to start. And then I'll hit the letter O and kind of take a look at what it's doing overall to the image. Now, it does feather pretty well, but because I brought in my levels, it's starting to get like a little bit of a halo around the squirrel. So what I'm going to do is come over here and just pull this out, fading it in a little bit better, and then maybe even pull up on the feather further. And I'm really just looking in this area right here. Let me get my zoom tool and we'll zoom in right here. So watch what happens when I pull the feather down. And when I bring my levels back down, you can see there's just like this little outer glow happening around the squirrel. I don't really care for that, so I'm going to pull this up so that way it goes away. And then I'm also going to take my feather and fade that away. It's not going to go away completely, but I want to reduce it as much as I can. So now we'll go ahead and hit fit, bring us back out. And what I like to do to check all of my settings is turn off and turn on an effect. Now, this is a little strong for the overall feel for the image, so I don't want to darken down the background that much. I'm just going to go ahead and pull this up, like maybe, let's just call it -0.8. I think that looks good. It brings the subject more in focus and highlight it, and that's ultimately what I'm trying to go for here. So the next thing that I want to do is kind of work in this foreground area. Again, this is where the relighting works out, and I want to keep the subject relatively untouched. I only want to work with the grass area. Now, there's a lot of ways of doing this, but what I'm going to do is just create another depth mask, right click, create depth mask. And this time it's going to actually apply to the right area. And I'm just going to go ahead and adjust my exposure. I just want it to be exposed a little bit. Let's go with the structure, and I can always come back and readjust these. And then I'll bring the black point down because I think that matters, and I want to contrast it just a bit more, maybe something like that. And again, I can always come back and redo this. Now, at the current moment, it's actually over the squirrel, and I don't really care for that. It's also not selecting enough of this foreground that I really want. So what I want to do is see if I can tighten this up. So maybe pull that down and then do something maybe like that. Let's see what that looks like. And then again, you got to turn things off and on. Okay. So now what I need to do is remove it from the squirrel. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to click on the mask, hit the letter M and grab my masking bug. And then I'm going to grab a gradient mask up here. I'll click one time. And if I hit the letter O, you can see what it's doing here. It's cutting it off from the top portion. Now, I could have used a brush and painted this away, but the benefit of doing it this way is if I wanted to keep any of that effect over the squirrel, it's allowing me to do that because essentially this is an intersect mask where it's just subtracting the mask from the subject. So that's the reason why I do it this way. And I also get this nice little feather that I can use. And I'm going to crank up the exposure really high just so I can see where this is actually stopping relative space. So maybe somewhere around here. And then I'll just fade this a little bit more. And I think that that's going to be pretty good for editing this grassy area here. So now what I'm going to do is just bring back my exposure because I don't need it exposed that much. And I also don't need it on the squirrel. So this is where you would have to use a brush, and I'll just paint it away from here. So give me a second. Let me go grab a brush and go ahead and paint this away from the squirrel, just like so. And it doesn't have to be perfect in this particular area because you'll see that the squirrel is going to have, he's essentially blocking the light there. So it should be pretty drastic in the fall off to the background, which you can't even really tell. So it's not that big of a deal. All right. And I'm not going to make this perfect for tutorial sake, nor do I think it really needs to be perfect. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we came from. So this is the unedited version, or at least there is noise reduction on it. But other than that, there's no develop module added to this portion. And then this is where we've gotten with develop as well as our local adjustments. So at this point, it's time to kind of stylize the image. So what I'm going to do is come up here to snapshots, hit this, and I'm just going to call this base look because I think that I have a good base look. In fact, I forgot to do one thing. So let me do that real quick. We're going to add another local adjustment, and then we're going to come over to the animal eye brush. And then I'm just going to paint this over the eye. And what this helps with is brightening that area. And it's actually going outside of the eye now. So we'll hit Shift X and erase it from this little area right here. And I'll turn it off and on. It's going to be subtle, but I mean, it's pretty drastic, but like when you look at the image, you just perceive the sharpness or the eye. It's not one of those things where you notice it right off the bat. It's more like, oh yeah, the eye is, it's gleaming. I think that's the right word. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and right click on my snapshot up here, and then I'm going to click update snapshot with current settings. And that just saves the eye brightening. When I created this brush, I was working on a bird, but I use it for pretty much all of my animal eyes. And yeah, okay. So now it's time to actually modify the style of this image. And this is where I think the fun of working inside of ON1 really shines. So the first thing that I'll probably do here is let's see what a LUT does, because I think working with the overall color in an image is really fun. And ON1 has some pretty cool looks. So I like the color grading looks a lot. I use them frequent in my editing. So like this one doesn't look bad. It does take away a little bit of the warmth of the overall image, but you could always blend this with opacity and other blend modes. This one brings a little bit of richness to the colors. So I kind of like that, but it also maintains the contrast that I was going for. This one is more of like that muted, faded look. Not sure if that is what I want to go for here. And, you know, this is purely personal. So for the sake of tutorial purposes, I'm going to just select one, and I think I'll go with classic. And then, like I said, I can just pull down on the opacity here and kind of just blend this in. It's subtle, but it changes the overall tonality to something that looks a little bit more natural. And if I wanted to contrast it a little bit more, I could do that. And if I felt like it was taking away too much of the saturation, I can add some saturation. So now what I'm learning, or what I'm getting here, is this needs to be a little bit more like sunshine filled. And there's a sunshine filter, and I really enjoy the sunshine filter. It's a lot of fun to play with. I'm just going to warm this up a touch and then pull down on the amount because it is a little strong for the image right now. And then I am going to fade this in using a mask, and I'm going to use a linear gradient, and I'm just going to use the top left and rotate it. Keep things simple. All right. Sometimes you just got to keep stuff really, really simple. And what I want to do, because you can tell over here on the left side, the sun is coming in this direction. I'm just going to pull this and let it fade over the squirrel mostly, and then fade off into the background. So maybe do something like that. And let's see what that looks like. So if I turn it off and turn it on, you can see it just kind of fades all the way over to this point where it's a little bit darker, and I'm okay with that. And then I'm just going to increase the saturation, because things that are a little bit brighter, they are a little bit more saturated. So we'll do something like that. And I think that this looks pretty good for this image right here. So what else could I do? Let's go ahead and throw in a sun flare. And I use these from time to time in my edits. I think that they're fun to play with. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this to the other side, and then I'm going to move it maybe just out of frame, and then we'll lower the opacity, because I don't think it needs to be like crazy strong. It just needs to be perceived like we added in that sunshine, and now it makes sense to add in a little bit of lens flare. Like, it's more perceived than anything else. You can't really see it, but you could see it. And I know that that is a very confusing statement there, but I like what it's doing to the overall image. It really is helping with making this squirrel kind of stand out. So the last thing to make this squirrel stand out is, of course, adding in dynamic contrast. So what I'm going to do is actually put this at the bottom, because I want the dynamic contrast to be impacted by all of these filters as opposed to impacting all of those filters. So it looks a little bit more natural, except for I don't want it anywhere except for on our squirrel. So I'm going to go ahead and click the mask, and then we'll come up to masking. And let's see if animal does a good job. And I want to paint this in and hit apply. Now, I'm not one of those people that is like, hey, this needs to be the most accurate mask for the dynamic contrast in this, because I think that it's okay for things to not be perfect all the time. So if I turn this off and turn it on, you can see how that's just helping him kind of stand out, but it is a little bit strong. He looks very contrasty, and I don't want to make him overly contrasted. So we'll pull this down. I think somewhere around 4750 is probably appropriate. It's more of a perception. Again, it probably won't even come through on YouTube, but it is something that's showing on my screen, and I really do like it. So we'll go ahead and hit the backslash key. This is what we came into the edit window with. And after moving around some sliders and me bumping my gums talking through it, ended up with something that looks like this. And I really do enjoy this photo. So if you want to learn more about On1 Photo Raw, consider signing up for a one-on-one coaching session with me. The link is in the description box below. If you want to save some money when you pick up On1 Photo Raw or anything over in the On1 store, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. They are having a On1 Unleashed conference in February, and my code, it works for that ticket. So if you want to save some money when you pick up that ticket, consider using my coupon code. Until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.